My name is Kristen Tollefson. I'm the education director here at the Bainbridge Island Museum of Art, and I am delighted to welcome you to a conversation with Lois Morrison, Julie Chen, moderated by Sandra Kroupa. This is a very special event, as you're all well aware because you're here. We offer a whole array of programs within the museum, but every once in a while a gem comes our direction, and we are just so delighted to have these rock stars here.
So I've titled my little introduction, Summing Up the Impossible. So first I feel like I need to tell you a couple of things about me to put my introduction of Lois and Julie in perspective. I lucked into my job in special collections, too long of a story. I spent a few years apprenticing with a bookbinder in my free time. I took lessons with a conservator. I bought a Vandercook press in the early 80s and took letterpress classes through the Women's Skills Exchange in Seattle with my good friend Kate Leonard, who's in the audience, and I now have 3 presses. I wasn't terribly good at any of it then, and I'm still not. But I see that the purpose of all that training was the path given to me to understand and appreciate the work of supremely talented artists like Lois and Julie. I'm here to introduce 2 amazing creative women and prompt them with some questions. On the surface, one might say their work has little in common, except that it's exciting and innovative and really smart. But they have known each other for a long time and have influenced each other and been friends and collaborated over many years. My job in just a few minutes now is to introduce you to them, not in a biographical way, but in a way when you see the images of their work scrolling behind us, you will know whose work is whose. I can't explain the work of these artists. You have to experience the work, not through pictures, but in the hand. If we were in special collections, I could hand you the books that will flash by us, and you could manipulate Julie's complex structures and touch Lois's fabric books and truly understand the physicality of these pieces. What we do today is like describing Brahms' Third Symphony without listening to it. Pretty much impossible, but we will do our best. Okay, now I have to do 3 things at once here. So, Lois Morrison has been an artist throughout her life. She creates all kinds of work: prints, soft sculptures, quilts, books, among many things. She lives with her husband, Phil Ziegler, in a house that seems to me to be a fairy tale, surrounded by years of carefully accumulations of antiques and precious discards that in her visionary way she sees as art. She's as much a curator for me as an artist. She makes art from ordinary elements and transforms them into surprising and exceptional work. And of course, she's impossible to sum up. Lois's texts and themes fall into 2 main categories, and she uses either text by major writers, mostly of the 19th and early 20th century, or her own texts. One of Lois's themes is what is now being called social justice, although I doubt she would use that term. Often historical perspectives of war. Her other avenue of expression is whimsical and humorous, but frequently with an underscored serious element. For her social justice, see where we are? For social justice work, she has used poems by Herman Melville. We're going to go back to this. This is Wilfred Owen. She's created beautiful, sad, brief stories about Japanese babies' souls rising into heaven after Hiroshima. Her whimsical world is populated by the yellow goat, who's one of my favorites, the capybara, who wears a hat and rides a horse, and Dracula, who I don't have a picture of, but we own the Dracula one. She told me that we absolutely had to have it because it was about bunnies, and I'm a bunny person. And the many elephants and ever-popular Saint Ostrich, the heroine of the most recent Lois and Julie collaboration. No, we should have, yes. I've been lucky enough to know Julie Chen and her work since the early 1990s. She is considered by most people in the book arts field to be among the most intelligent, complex, and creative artists working in the book form. Her book works are a perfect melding of art and craft, proving that books to be considered art do not have to be from poorly constructed, inferior materials. I use her work in teaching often as many as 50 times in a 10-week quarter. Her work never fails to amaze, entrance, and fascinate. In fact, I've come to count on uniform excitement her work inspires in students, even those whose demeanor challenges engagement. The audible gasps when I demonstrate true to life, which is up on the screen, is a predictable teaching high of any session. I move the little panels and they all go, and I always reward them for having done the right thing. There's not a single time in the last 25 years that students have not picked her work out as one of the most inspirational. Julie's art is almost impossible to paraphrase or sum up. It's a litmus test. That is a litmus test for me to the best work in book arts. I can't sum up Brahms either. Her books must be read, experienced in the physical form, handled, and contemplated. There is nothing easy or transitory about her work. She has dealt with a myriad of very serious topics: death, environmental issues, civil rights, the biases of belief, troubled relationships, political and social strife, and the foundation of creative vision. As many artists do, Julie uses her own life experiences to inform and inspire her work, but unlike anyone else in the field I know, Julie strives meticulously to utilize the emotion, but not the facts. Julie's work is so successful because she can tap into the common core of experience we all can relate to without putting her own life on display. Because I've watched thousands of people connect to her pieces, I believe I can say without a doubt Julie's work has a broad appeal and application. Julie has written that her, in quote, goal is to create an immersive reading experience by producing a reading object that marries concept and physical engagement. I believe she's reached that goal and is climbing higher with every book. And now there's going to be a series of images behind us, but now we're going to talk to each other. Basically what I'm going to try to do is provide some questions to both of them, and either of them can speak up, depending on, I think Julie's going to start. So my first question was, how did you guys meet?
I didn't want to tell this story. Be the one to tell this story. So I've known Lois for over 40 years, and I met her as a young teenager because her son was one of my first boyfriends.
He was 6'5",
Yeah,
and she's only 5 feet tall.
On a good day, 5 feet tall. So I met her as my boyfriend's mother and would go to their house. And as Lois had mentioned earlier, the house is full of art that Lois has made, and also just an incredible array of objects that she's collected. And so I was introduced to art really through Lois, because Lois was the first artist I had ever met. And I had always been interested in art. My mother, who's here in the audience, was a big believer in learning craft skills. And so when I was growing up, I learned a lot of we did a lot of macrame and decoupage and all kinds of things that were really physical. But I didn't really have any understanding of what a fine artist did. I knew what fine art was, sort of, but I never really understood how an artist actually created art. And so meeting Lois at a young age, I think, was really instrumental in my own career, because I was able to see someone who was living an artist's life. And I could see, Lois was also, a wonderful mother, and really the family was a really important part of her life, but she was also an artist. And so So that was that. This is a really important thing for me, looking back, just having had that exposure to you as an artist and a person.
Thank you. Oops.
So, Lois, what drew you to perhaps spend more time or energy with Julie? Because I know she did not go into a relationship with your sons that was lengthy.
Not in
So
those days.
So at some point, I know Julie moved away from New Jersey. How did you guys continue to keep in touch?
Julie came. She came to the house. She came back. And she's easy to love. But I think that my affection for her was for her first as a person. And I think she developed as an artist much later. But it was just so easy to love you. I didn't care what my son did.
I think one of the things that Lois said to me was the dumbest thing her son ever did was to break up with Julie. However, I believe her husband Phil said the best thing that happened was that they broke up because then he could have a much better relationship with Julie as his friend rather than as his son's girlfriend. So early on, even when you were a kid, basically, did the two of you discuss art?
Not
I don't remember that.
I don't either.
We discussed food, and Julie and Christopher made meals for us based on your meals. But we didn't discuss art.
I think in those early years, it was really just based on the whole social interaction that I would go to my boyfriend's family's house and just be with the family. And the art was just sort of in the background because it was always part of Lois's life. The other thing, I was talking to Lois yesterday at dinner about how she always had piles of Craft Horizons, which is now American Craft magazine, lying around the house, just piles of magazines. And I had no idea that magazines were made about art or about craft. And so that was my first introduction as well into that world, that there was a whole world of art that was not just what you saw in a gallery or a museum, but that people wrote about it, and you could read profiles of artists, and it was a real, something that really stuck with me all those years. But you were asking, how we stayed in touch, and I think when I moved to California, we did lose touch for a number of years. Yeah. And then when my daughter was born, she's here in the audience too, I wrote to Lois just to say, because I remembered her very fondly, and I wrote her a letter saying, I had a daughter, and she sent a little jacket that she had made for
a little kimono jacket,
a little kimono jacket with rabbits on it, and then we started a correspondence at that point.
Yeah.
So that was sort of a wonderful experience as well to be able to reconnect with someone who I respected so much and also loved at that but had been we broke up, and you break up with your boyfriend's family as well as your boyfriend, so it wasn't it wasn't like I could just slide right into a relationship, but we reconnected years later.
So your archivist would like to know, where are those letters?
Well, if you didn't find them in those boxes,
we haven't found them yet.
Well,
but
I don't know.
Okay, well, we'll be working on that. She's probably got them someplace.
No, I don't.
No?
No.
Oh.
Sorry.
Okay, all right. Sniff, sniff. Okay. When you decided to go to school in book arts, did you talk to Lois about that?
I don't think so.
No.
I mean, that's sort of leads into this other thing about our careers is Lois had been an artist for many, many years before I started making art, but we started making books at almost the same time, just independently. And so I decided to go back to graduate school, and I said, I'm going to do this thing called book arts. And Lois said, oh, well, that's interesting because I'm making books too. And when I had known her earlier, she was doing other kinds of work and not making books. And it was just a very interesting fortuitous sort of
Yeah.
thing that happened. So I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
No, I just thought it was wonderful that we were both making books. She was going to get a degree in making books, and I fell into them sort of accidentally, and just, that's what I wanted to do.
So so the first collaboration you did was The Memory of Fruit? Yes?
Mm-hmm. That was in the 80s while I was still in graduate school. So I was in graduate school at the book art program in Mills College, where I now teach. And at that time, you know, I had to do all these books for classes as class projects. And it's hard. At that time, I really wasn't doing a lot of my own work, where I was doing all the content myself. And I just didn't feel like I had that authority to say, well, I'm going to just publish my own work. So I would ask other artists, you know, do you want to collaborate on a project? And so since Lois had started making books, I said, do you want to make a book together? And she said, sure. I said, well, what do you want to do? And she said, I want to do a book about fruit. I said, okay. So then she started sending me these little hand-written bits of manuscript and drawings, and told me, you know, I don't know, you should tell the story.
And Julie put it together. It's amazing.
But it was all your content. So you told me what you wanted, you know, what the stories were going to be, and then I had to figure out how to get it printed and typeset and all that stuff.
But that's the joy of working with Julie. She does the engineering, and when she lets me do all the writing and all of the drawing, that's the easy part. And she just does this wonderful, she takes it and makes it into magic.
Do you want to talk about the fruit, the guy running from the fruit with the little strings? That it was sort of your first movable, right?
Yeah.
Probably.
Yeah.
Well, Lois, part of this book, so the book is called Memories of Fruit, and it has all these charming stories about things having to do with fruit. There are recipes. This is before recipes were really big and putting in books, way before that. But one of the things she wanted to put in there was a little, it's not even a story. It's really just this idea that about this guy who had a fruit phobia.
He did. We never knew where it came from. But we couldn't do sangria. We could do nothing with fruit.
So she said, is there some way you can show this in a book, like that he's being chased by fruit? And I thought, well, okay. You know, and I wasn't sure what to do, and we settled on having, you open the page and there's a lino block of a guy running.
Yep.
And then there are these elastic cords with letterpress printed fruits attached to them. So you open it and there's sort of this stretchiness, and he's running and the fruits are kind of, you know, he can't, they're coming behind him. So
Are we going to identify the inspiration for?
Well, should I, Phil?
That was the apricot tree, wasn't it?
He was a gentleman who was fortunate enough to manage his own funds, and his name was Edgar Rosenstock.
Oh,
I don't even know if he's still alive. Maybe he got caught by the fruit.
Remind me the name of the event that happens in the party.
Oh, yeah.
What's that called?
Probably it's the apricot fruit.
Yes, that's it.
Yeah, we had an apricot tree down south, and it bloomed every year, and we never got an apricot. One year, there were 3 apricots on the tree, and I was so excited. We designed this sort of party, and we got the 3 apricots, and we started to bite into them, and they were horrible, absolutely dreadful. They were rejects, I guess, I don't know. But we went on with the party, and the kids went up and down the road with their pots and pans and their funny coats, and they dressed up. And our dirt road goes, it's about a quarter of a mile to our neighbor, and their children were in this, and so they walked up and down the road banging on pots. It was just a lovely festival.
I think the official title of this celebration was the celebration for we don't have to eat the terrible.
Thank God we don't have to eat the apricots. They were so bitter.
Yes, that's I knew it had a catchy title that let's see. So we've gotten past these. So let's talk about St. Ostrich. So the first St. Ostrich book is about St. Ostrich in Manhattan. Can you guys tell us about that book and how it germinated?
Well, I would like Lois to talk about St. Ostrich before that book, because one of the reasons we decided to do that book is because I had seen a lot of her fabric books, and Lois makes these wonderful, she's had several really amazing, they're up on the screen, characters that you talked about, the lone capybara who's got the mask, and there's Mound Man and thin-toed flat frog. But then there's St. Ostrich.
Yellow goat.
So this yellow goat came later, but St. Ostrich had already had a couple of books.
She did. St. Ostrich is she's actually a biblical character in the book of Job. God describes, and if you think God's not funny, he's great. He describes this ostrich about how she doesn't recognize her children. She walks around and steps on the eggs, and at one point later, which I don't have in the book, I think, she actually refuses to recognize the horse when he goes, ha-ha. So I just thought this was wonderful, so I started having this St. Ostrich character for various books, and she developed from being, she wasn't a saint at first, she was just an ostrich. St. Ostrich ponders about things, and St. Ostrich, anything you can do, I can do better. Her egg is huge. So these books came, and then they just, once she became a saint, and her sainthood is in the book now that we did, so that is described in that. Once she became a saint, she had died as a martyr, but she kept coming back to life as she kept, not to life, but she made appearances the way saints do. You know, she would appear somewhere, like she would be in Red Square, and she would be behind all these Russians with their hats with the red stars on them. Or she would take sand. This was in the book she got. She took sand to Rockefeller Center in the skating rink, and you can imagine what happened. But her thing was, her theme was that she thought sand was the most important thing in the world, and she wanted everybody to know this and to have this, and to have it in their lives. And it usually created some mayhem.
I was privileged to watch the two of them actually compose the text for the most recent St. Ostrich book, and Julie would ask Lois questions, and Lois never paused. I mean, when you asked her about St. Ostrich, she knew exactly what the answer was, and I wish I had had a tape recorder for that conversation. It was just one of the coolest things I think I've ever experienced.
Well, I knew her pretty well, and I was surprised at my answers, but they were there.
Yeah.
I really had never thought this
Right.
before.
No, it was clear that she hadn't planned out what to say. She just, when she was asked a question, she knew exactly what the right answer was.
It was like you were talking about, you know, a real I know St. Ostrich is sort of a real person to you, but it was as if you were telling the story of some, you know, that actually happened. I would say, okay, because we had been talking about making this book, the second book, which is called A Recuerdo for St. Ostrich, but we hadn't really gotten around to working out the details. And then Sandra and I visited Lois in Virginia, where they live in the summer, and so I said, okay, let's sit down and let's talk about what's going to be in the book. So where do you want to start? And so Lois would just start with the story, as if she's telling, you know, the story about meeting Sandra or something. Oh, well, St. Ostrich,
Yeah.
you know, when it gave sand to the baby Jesus.
Well, that was her gift. That was her gift to the baby Jesus, and it so impressed the Virgin Mary that when she became the Virgin of Guadalupe, she wanted St. Ostrich to come to Mexico.
This was all new information.
Yeah.
I mean, this had never been discussed before, and it just came rolling right
No,
out.
I never thought of this, but it was there.
This is what I mean by creativity. I mean, you just sort of have to stand around and watch them do anything, and
Yeah, at
it's
a certain point I
amazing.
say, wait, I need a piece of paper. I have to write
Yeah,
this down.
right. And then I think that conversation went on for about 2 hours.
Hmm. Well, the whole text for that book was
Written pretty much on the spot,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
was
That's good.
truly amazing. So, what do you think you'll do next together? Does
Me?
Saint, yeah, but the two of you, would you collaborate again? Is another Saint
It
Ostrich?
depends. I'm in my end game, and I really don't know.
It's hard to say. You know, we'll see what happens next.
Yep.
It could be St. Ostrich, or it could be something completely different.
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, just from the peanut gallery here, I think it'd be great to have a few of your other characters who are in very, very small editions. Lois makes fabric books with 2 copies, and she sells 1 copy and she keeps 1 copy in her archive. And I'm thrilled to say both of these women have are donating their archive to the University of Washington Library. And so we will have copies of all of her fabric books, but there are thousands, millions of people out there who would love to get to know the yellow goat or the capybara, or especially the one from India. The Indian one is really, that one's hysterical. And it would be interesting to let those characters out into slightly larger editions. Hint, 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 hint.
Well, look,
It's not there yet.
Okay, just saying, just saying.
Lois does make paper editions as well,
Yeah.
which have more than 2 copies.
Yes, that's true.
So there
Usually
are.
25.
Yes, usually
Mhm.
25. But
So
those are still few and far between. But anyway, just thought I'd throw that out. So I know both of you teach, have been teachers, have both done academic teaching and workshops and that kind of thing. Can you talk a little bit about how you feel what you need to pass on your inspiration to work in this field? I mean, the field of book arts in the 48 years that I've been doing this has gone from this kind of word that nobody could really understand what it meant to, you know, I mean, there's the College Book Arts Association. I mean, it's become a thing. But I think that each person who has the credibility that both of you have in the field, people seem to feel an obligation to pass that on to people. Could you talk a little bit about where you feel education, whether it's a workshop or a one-on-one or however, affects how you do your work or how you think about the field?
Wow. Okay. I began teaching art long before I became interested in work. And I really thought that I could teach people to see the whole business of learning how to draw or learning how to paint or learning how to do any of these things was to learn how to look either inside yourself or at the world, but you had to learn to see. And I can teach anyone how to draw a tree or a bush or all kinds of things. I can teach you, you will have an object that you have actually created on your own. I can teach you how. But what I'm teaching you actually is how to see. Not how to draw a tree, not how to draw anything else, but how to see. And that, I think, that was my academic life.
Could you talk a little bit about the Sock Monkey project?
Oh, yeah.
I don't know if you're still doing that.
No, I'm not, but it's very interesting because I used to teach an ESL class for women whose husbands had come to the States, sent by their companies, and they came with them, these young women, and they sometimes had children. They frequently had 10 years of English, had never had a conversation in English. So a bunch of us were taking these young people in, and I thought, well, they would talk to each other or to me if we did sock monkeys. I mean, I knew how to make a sock monkey. So I got these, you can still get these sock monkey socks. They're still making them. And so I started this, and before I knew it, there were 20 or 30 people lining up to take this class, and they stopped talking. So they stopped talking. So I quit doing the sock monkeys.
I got to join her in one of her sock monkey classes once, and it was
really?
Yeah. One time when I came to visit you, you said I have to teach class. Come on, and so I went and tried to. I don't think I actually participated in the sock monkey. If I could have added more things to this slideshow, I would show the. There was a chair when I was at her house in New Jersey with about 6 sock monkeys that were anatomically correct.
That's my friend Marcia Wilson.
Yeah.
They're wonderful.
They are.
So when I started teaching after graduate school, what I started doing first was teaching workshops, book art workshops. And at that time, this is in the late 80s, early 90s, there weren't as many centers for the book as there are now, and there weren't as many people teaching workshops at that time. And so what people really wanted to learn was structure, like how do you make a tunnel book, how do you make a flag book, how do you do this and that. And so I had this really active practice teaching these weekend workshops, sometimes 5-day workshops for people to make these things. And as time went on, people started to want more things about content. Like, okay, I know how to make a flag book. Now, how do I get the content that will go in the flag book? But that came later, and by that time I was teaching as an adjunct instructor at Mills College in the book art program. So I was teaching one class a semester, but I was really working on my studio work mostly, and then teaching a lot of these workshops in the summer. And so at that time, I felt like I was really doing a service to the community because there weren't that many people teaching these unusual structures. But now, there's so many people that teach these workshops who have learned them from people who learn them from people who learn them from me, possibly, that I don't have to teach that anymore because it's covered. Yeah. But I think the need for content generation and how do you go about making text and image for a book is still something that people are interested in. So I'm still teaching a little bit of workshop stuff in the summer, but mostly I'm teaching at Mills College and in an academic setting. And one thing that some of my studio assistants, for a while I had several studio assistants on 1 day a week because it seemed like the only day I could fit it in instead of having one person more days a week to have 3 people 1 day a week. So I had these groups of people working for me, and they were all former students or current graduate students, and they asked me just, in the middle of a work day and a conversation, like, well, if you could magically choose, like you could drop teaching, like you won the lottery or something, and you could just do your studio work, you would do that, right? And I kind of paused in my work and I'm thinking about it. And they're like, we can't believe you're just thinking about that. I mean, of course you would do it. And I said, no, because teaching is a really important part of my practice. And I'm not sure that I would want to give it up, even if I could give it up. I mean, it's really integral to my life as an artist. I mean, it is hard a lot of times, especially now that I'm almost full-time and teaching in an undergrad and graduate program, to fit it all in. But it's a really important thing to me to be able to connect with people and teach them and foster this growing sort of interest in making books and book art and how to create content for books. And one of the classes I teach every semester is Introduction to Book Art. People who don't know anything, they're coming in from the other disciplines because I teach at a liberal arts college. And I know, 99.5% of these people are probably never going to make a book again after they leave school. But I feel like what I'm able to try to give them is going to be valuable to them, to think about how to express yourself through sequence and text and image. I think that will come in handy no matter what field they go into. And so that's a really important part of what I do. As well as teaching graduate students who may go on. A lot of them do have aspirations to go on and do studio work. So that's it was interesting to me because when they asked me this, I had never really thought about it seriously. But when someone asks you a serious question, you think, would I do that? And they were just really shocked. But I think that's the thing that's telling is that it's all of a piece for me. The teaching and the making.
Do you want to mention the Mills intensive program in the summer now?
Oh, we just started last year the Mills Summer Institute for Book and Print Technologies, which is this year is 2 weeks of workshops, and it's a way for people to come to Mills to work in our studios without having to spend 2 years getting an MFA, which a lot of people are not, able to drop everything and do. So we are having 4 workshops this summer in June. I'll be teaching a box making workshop that's full. But Karen Kuntz is coming to teach a color woodblock workshop, and Colette Fu's teaching a pop-up workshop, and Kathy Walkup is teaching a scholarly book art workshop where there's going to be kind of delving into book art history as well as a little bit of making. So it should be an interesting summer. We're looking forward to that.
Can I sign up for the Kathy one? That sounds interesting. Sorry, I didn't know about that one. Okay, where are we here? Okay, we talked about sock monkeys. So I guess the next thing I would say is when I talk to artists who are wanting to do books, they often come in to look at things in the collection for motivation, to try to look at how other artists have dealt with a serious subject or what kind of physical manifestation to turn what they want to do into something. How do you both work with inspiring yourself? I guess that Lois just sits and thinks, and that's plenty. But I'd like to hear that. Lois, you always seem to have like more ideas than you can work on at any one time.
Yes, I've never had a block.
Which is amazing.
Well, my hand doctor, the one who's worked on my hands, so his wife was a psychologist, and she dealt with people who had blocks. And so when I went in and I knew I couldn't do anything, I said, "Can she give me a block?"
That's a quotable line.
But what happens, I don't think I just sit down and think. I'm always thinking. It's in the back of my mind. It's not a conscious thing out there. But gradually, as I collect the elements, I will find something here and something else there and something else there, and I won't know what to do with them. And then all of a sudden, I'll find something that'll bring them together. And all of a sudden, the text is also there then because it makes sense. Occasionally, I will read the Wilfred Owen poems. I was reading Wilfred Owen, and I thought, I've got to do these. And a friend of mine had a wonderful life drawing class with a couple they weren't married, but they were very, very comfortable with each other, and they were a delight to draw. So I went there and I drew and I drew and I drew and I drew. So then I had my soldiers that were dying. And this, I think I must have done 3. I did the ones that were sonnet length. And they were just, moved me no end. And then I found a Herman Melville has done one at Shiloh. And again, I had to make the book.
I think that was the first book we got of yours, was the Shiloh book.
Okay.
Oh, actually, no, it was Persephone. And then the Shiloh book. That was the first Claude book.
Yeah.
What was the question? I got really invested.
How you find inspiration?
It varies. I mean, it comes from a lot of different things. Sometimes just something will come up in the news, or one of my students will say something that sort of kind of triggers some cascade of ideas. It's hard to know exactly where it comes from.
Yeah.
But I always tell my students at a certain point, the book takes over, and the book tells you what it wants or what it needs, or and then you have to sort of follow. And so I kind of live for those moments when the book takes over, because then I know I'm on the right track. But sometimes I start with something and it's like, well, that's not right, or that's not right, and I'm kind of casting about, figuring out what I'm trying to do. But there's usually, I won't say always, but there's usually a moment though when the book just starts dictating, like, you have to do this. And even if it's something that's really crazy and kind of far-fetched, it's like, really? Do we really have to do that? I think the book says yes. It's like, okay, I'll figure it out, I'll get back to you. And so I'm having this conversation it's really with me in my own head, but it's really with the book, and the book saying, you need to do this, and me trying to make a case, like, do I really have to do that, or can I do something else, or why do I have to do that? And then I have to really figure out what I'm doing. And I think that's always what the books are, is me going through this process of of starting out with an idea and figuring out what I'm doing. And then once I get on that road where I'm really starting to figure it out, then everything just sort of starts to flow. But it could start with a number of different things. Oh, one of the things I wanted to mention was Barb Tettenbaum and I, Barb's in the audience somewhere, I don't know where she is, but we did this deck of cards, this double deck of cards called Artist Book Ideation Cards. They really were Barb's brainchild. She had been using them in her class and then had talked to me about collaborating on a commercial edition so that we could sell them for a fairly reasonable price and have them out in the world. And so we worked on this double deck together, and they give you prompts for doing a book. And so I did a couple of books using the cards for exhibitions that Barb and I co-curated, invited people to work on these books. And that was an interesting process because it was sort of like giving myself an assignment, the way I give students an assignment. And sometimes it was stuff that I wasn't particularly interested in, because I would get these card draws that said, use your least favorite color. You can't use any image.
Yes, the cat's cradle piece.
Yeah, and it's sort of like,
Cat's
oh
cradle.
my God, what am I going to do? And I kind of felt like, oh, I understand what my students are going through. When I give them an assignment, they're thinking, oh, I don't know what to do. And but it really pushed me to do these things that I wouldn't normally do. And so that's been an interesting thing that I probably wouldn't have been ready to do maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that I now feel like, oh, this is an interesting challenge. It's abstract, but it's kind of forcing me to think about things differently.
Do you think the cards would have come into your life and changed your bus story when the You want to tell your bus story briefly?
Oh.
Even though some people
Yeah,
may have
I
never
told the story in my talk the other day where when I was younger, I really felt like I could never tell people what I was working on until the book was at least halfway finished, or else a bus would come and kill me. Like I would get hit by a bus and die and never finish the book. And so I really had this deep-seated superstition about that if I talked about it, that the bus was going to hunt me down and find me. And so I don't know if that would have made a difference or not. It's hard to know. But somewhere along the way, the bus kind of decided to give it a rest and is haunting someone else now.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I remember for years you would never tell me what you were working on, and then suddenly you started to talk about it, and it took me a while to figure out, oh my gosh, we've gone over a hump.
Well, I'll even tell you, I'm having a block right now.
Yeah.
You want my block?
Yeah.
My hands are fine right now.
Hey.
Time is gone.
So I'll tell you what it's about. So because I'll embarrass my daughter, but I had a show last year at Mills. It was like the last 10 years worth of work because their exhibition space is much smaller than Sandra's, and so we didn't do like a whole retrospective. It was just the last 10 years. And we had question and answers after, and then my daughter was there in the audience, but she didn't ask the question until after we left the hall. But she said, oh, I have a question for you. She says, I noticed that you use a lot of pictures of texture in your work, like pictures of tree bark or seaweed or, but they're pictures, they're images. She says, I think you should use real texture, actual texture in a book. She says, I think you should call it the texture tome. It should be a big book of texture. And I thought, that's really interesting. And it was sort of like the cards. It was sort of like getting an ideation card draw where you're randomly handed this challenge. And I thought, well, this is really interesting. And so we spent the next 6 months, every time they would come, she and her husband would come over for dinner, I would ask her more questions. So when you think about texture, what are you thinking about? And I learned a lot about the way she experiences the world and how different it is from the way I experience the world. So I started doing research about physical learning versus abstract learning. And I thought, I'm getting somewhere with this. But what I've discovered, it's been a year, almost a year now since this challenge came up. And I still am kind of stuck. And I realized that it's really hard for me personally to think in texture. And I never would have known that without this challenge. And so I feel like there's one missing piece that will unlock all the stuff that I've been thinking about and kind of experimenting with, but it hasn't come yet. So I'm blocked, but I'm not hopeless. I feel like it's going to happen, but I don't know when. You know, it's sort of, in the meantime, I'm doing all these things to try and get at it, and I'll spend, you know, long periods of time working on it and think, okay, I think I'm onto something, and I'll come back the next day. It's like, no, that's not it. You know, but I'm ruling things out one by one, and yeah, so that's the project I'm working on now. It's still called Texture Tome. That's the working title of it, but it's there's a lot that's gone into the research, and practical research, and actual academic research, but it's still not. Can't tell you what it's about yet. You know, I really don't know what's going to happen.
Julie, I just want you to know you're responsible. You and Barbara are partly responsible for the book From Hell.
Oh yeah, tell the story.
I had given a talk about content at a book art symposium. I had a lecture about content, and I had 2 games you could play to get content. And I've never done a workshop or a lecture that includes something that I didn't do myself, because you have to do it yourself. And every time I do a workshop, I get another one-of-a-kind book, because I have to do a book about that form. Anyway, so I did, and I put all the words down on both sides. One list was making 2 lists of words, just quick, and then looking at them and drawing lines between things that might make sense. Oh, say I. Then I picked up these cards. Dang nab, pick your favorite color. Yellow. And by the time I got through with it, here was this book, more complete than any book I have thought about in a long time. And it was a book. It was called The Yellow Wood. And in this book, animals are dancing in a yellow wood. And there's the little goat is dancing, and the great rabbit in the sky came down to dance. The only one that was not from another book was the little dog. There's a little striped dog that's dancing. Every other one, including the snake before Eve's got to him, you know, that thing where he lost the ability to walk. But in making this book, every single copy had a major mistake I had to fix. It was the book From Hell.
She did finally get over it, though. We have a copy, so
Yeah, well, I'm through with that book.
Okay, well, we're getting close to probably wrapping it up. I guess the last major question I had is, both of you have very rich ties with your families, and I know that family was what sort of brought you guys together in the first place. It's always interesting for me to talk to families of very creative people, because often they love you, but they don't quite understand where Mound Band comes from, and it's kind of hard to explain. How do you feel that, I know that Julie often looks at her own life, but is able to create books that talk to everyone, because we all share so many similar emotions. I guess that's the final thing I'm interested in, is I find, and more purposely, the students that I encounter find very deep and meaningful messages in your work. And where do you feel message and content fits in art, I guess, which is like, I think I just asked you sort of what the meaning of life is. Would you like to speak on this topic, or just say, oh, thanks a lot, and we're done now?
Can you rephrase the question? I feel like I'm not sure, because you started out with family, but then it went into...
Well, I sort of, I equate family, or the concept of family, with those things that are most important to us spiritually and socially and emotionally. Where do you see those things? How do you want to present that in work? I mean, the book arts, when I started, was fine press printing, and it mostly was people bickering about, is this A too close to that I? And now it seems like a complete reversal of that has happened, and it's really, book arts are about, the best work is about something. And it's about the artist trying to reach out to an audience and have them understand something meaningful. And I guess I just wanted each of you to talk a little bit about that practice, about what you're trying to do with your work.
For me, I think what I'm really trying to do is understand things myself. And the way that works for me, or the way that I've discovered that works for me for understanding the world, is to make art. And so and I talked about this a little bit the other night, a lot of what my texts are letters to myself, to try to tell myself or remind myself what I know and what I don't know, and how those things relate. And so I do draw a lot from my own experience, but my own experience really isn't the important thing, because it's really what I'm trying to learn about the world, through art. And I think, other people in other fields would learn about the world like through the sciences, by actually experimenting and learning getting hard knowledge about things. As an artist, I think we can only really take our experience and try to understand what that experience means. And so I'm hoping that, and it's always encouraging to talk to you about when you tell me about how students respond to the work, in hearing that it actually does get across, and that people recognize something in it in their own lives. And so I guess that's I don't know if that's if I'm answering the question correctly, but I think that it's really the art is the vehicle, but there's a deeper thing going on, which is trying to just understand what's going on around me.
Lois, would you like to say?
Okay. I think my first response is not exactly Julie's. I'm just having a ball. But there are times when I'm thinking about things that I care about deeply, as I've mentioned before, the Wilfred Owen series. But there are other things. There are really silly, silly books, but they underlie something else. I have a group of rabbits from India that have learned to swim underwater with the fish, so that when the nets are dropped into the ocean by these people who are trying to catch the endangered species, these rabbits jump in and all they get is rabbits. So, but I'm quite serious about watching out for these endangered fish. And so that's just one example of something that is, that is really, is that it?
Perfect timing.
Okay.
Where we got the fish.
Yeah.
Karma.
That's
The karma
amazing,
strikes
yeah.
again.
And over again, I find myself sort of slipping underneath with something I'm writing about or making a book about, because it always has some undercurrent that probably, some of the time I'm sure I'm the only one who knows, but many times people do get it, But I'm afraid that I'm just out for a good time.
So I guess the last thing is, do either of you have anything you'd really like to say about your work, your collaboration, life in general? Preferably not political at the moment.
Please no.
Yes, please no.
No, I can't think of anything.
I feel like we really covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
So,
I did have one thing.
yes, please.
In my relationship with Julie, when I was the big lady in the house, there's been a role reversal. Julie is the one I admire now, and she can get me out of pickles and things sometimes. And it really is a role reversal that I delight in.
So we've been at it an hour. I don't know whether we're going to, I didn't ask you, were we taking questions or just?
We can take a couple if you want to just reframe it. If somebody asks and you reframe it into the mic.
I can certainly try to do that. Yes, ma'am.
I'm always curious with the book arts people, what was your journey into book arts? Why did you choose book arts as your container for creating?
Okay, so the question is why books as the container for your art?
Accidental. I just loved making them. I loved sewing them. It was just, and it became more and more important. It grew gradually. I didn't just suddenly say, oh, I'm going to make book arts. But I made a book, and I made another one, and I made other things, and I made another book. That was how it went.
Julie?
I actually came into it accidentally as well. I did my undergrad in art, in studio art, and I got a degree in printmaking and sculpture, but I had never heard of book art at that time. This was in the 80s. And so when I was thinking about going to graduate school, I picked up the graduate catalog from Mills College art program. And there was a printmaking program, there was a sculpture program, but then I kept flipping through the pages, and there was also a book arts program, MFA in book arts, or an MA at that time in book arts. And I thought, well, what is book arts? And so I read the descriptions in the catalog. I had no idea what it was. Like letterpress printing? I have no idea. Book binding? Do people still do that? You know, I mean, it was just really weird. But there was something in my brain that said, call the number, make an appointment. So I did, and I talked to the director, Kathy Walkup, who's still the director. You know, she's my boss now. But so I went in, and my daughter was really young, and you know, we took the stroller and we went in. And as soon as I walked into the studio, I knew that this is what I needed to do. Had no idea what anything did. I'd never seen a printing press before. But there was work on the walls, there were broadsides on the walls, and there was just something about the smell of the place, and it's like, this is what I need to do. And so I applied to the program and got in, and Kathy told me years later, oh, I only got in by the skin of my teeth because I didn't have any books in my portfolio. She's like, well, why do you even want to be in this program? But I just hit the ground running from graduate school and never looked back, and it never occurred to me that this isn't what I should do. And even when people ask me, what are you going to do after school? It's like, well, I don't know. I mean, I'm going to make books. I don't know how I'm going to swing it, but I'm going to do it. And so I don't really generally believe in fate, but I don't know what else to call it because I had never heard of this field, and then all of a sudden, boom, this is my whole life, you know, my whole professional life from this point on.
I am a strong believer in fate. I would not know either of these people were it not for fate. I bought one of Lois's paper books, Persephone, which she makes in editions of 25 copies, and I just loved it, but I had no idea who she was. And Rutgers University called me up and said, we're doing a book arts symposium, we'd like you to come. And I said, okay, well, and they said, well, it's one day. It's going to be in November, which happened to be on my birthday. No travel, and the honorarium was $50. And I said, well, I might be busy that day. And then they said, oh, and Lois Morrison is willing to put you up. And I said, I'd pay money to come and stay at Lois Morrison's house and meet her. And you know what? I don't think they ever paid me the $50, but I spent 3 days at her house and got to see all her fabric books, and that was it. And Julie and I wound up being asked by Whitman College to speak at their inaugural book arts program, something, I can't even remember what it was, and she was really sick, and we were in the dorm together, and there was no one else. And I went and got her tea and cocoa and soup, and by the end of 3 days, we were buds. So I'm a firm believer in fate. God only knows where I would be without fate. Another question?
Just take one more.
Well, Barb.
Actually, Kathy asked me this question.
Oh, okay.
So, where does your writing come from, and did you study writing? I mean, does it come without the book structure, or does it only come because of the book structure? Can you talk about that?
You want to repeat?
Oh, the question is where does my writing come from, and did I study writing? And the answer is no, I didn't study writing. I never studied writing. And for a long time, I didn't consider myself to be a writer. And not because I didn't believe in my writing, but because the writing really can't be, I don't believe it should be separated from the book. So it's really, I think, in my mind, writers write, you know, maybe they're writing for the page, but the work can be taken off the page and it still exists as what it's supposed to be. Whereas my writing, if you take away its context, it kind of, I don't feel like it really exists in the form that's meaningful anymore. And so anyway, for me, text is just one of the elements in the book. So I'm working with text and image and structure, you know, the three basic things. And so sometimes I start with text, sometimes I start with image, sometimes structure, sometimes there's an idea and I don't know which one is going to start it, but then everything adjusts to everything else. Nothing takes precedence. And sometimes I'll be really attached to a text, and then as the book develops, it's like, well, no, this isn't going to work anymore. It's like, no, I don't want to not use it. It's like, well, you've got to give it up. So this is the book speaking. You must give it up. So I always end up doing, what the book needs, and some of those I regret in some part of my brain, but I've never regretted it for the book's sake. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, the writing is just one of many parts, I believe.
So I'm going to end with a blatant advertisement. There's a huge exhibition at the University of Washington Library and Special Collections of Julie's 30-year retrospective. All of her books, save, I guess, 2 pieces, with one early box piece that was too heavy to ship, and then 2 wall pieces that were too heavy to ship. Other than that, we have absolutely everything. And we also have a lot of archival material on exhibition. It will be up until the end of June. That's the good news. The bad news is we're not open on weekends. It's all within special collections because it needs both security and certain environmental conditions. And if you would like to come and visit, I would be happy to have you contact me directly because I'm the one with the keys to the locked cases, and I love getting things out to show to people because the worst way to see Julie's work is in a glass vitrine. Many people come to me and say, gosh, why don't you have things on exhibit? And I usually say, because no book artist really wants to have their work seen that way. They want it in your hand, and that's my job. And it is going to be my job until I drop over dead. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.